ancient motifs. And actually, what the video that was chosen for Syntropy EOS,
yes,
a coincidence happened. I was having an artist chat with Mai Chin, who is the visual artist trying underwater, and she had the Aurora Borealis as her background.
All right.
And I'm a big kind of mythology fan as well.
All right, good.
And I'm from North Wales, so like kind of the Celtic mythology.
Where are you from?
I always get a slightly, do you know Wrexham?
Yeah.
Yeah, so around, born and bred in Wrexham.
Yeah, so not far from the Lynn Peninsula.
Yes, yeah.
I was filming there a while back. Yeah, lovely.
Oh, yeah, it is.
I made a film all about the connectivity of Celtic music for television, a series.
Oh, did you?
A few years ago, and we were up in North Wales in the Lynn Peninsula shooting. We were also shooting with Cleo Roderick. Do you know her? She's the woman who brought the triple harp into Welsh music.
Oh, wow.
She's like about 90, and she's amazing. She's an incredible lady. Anyway, sorry I interrupted you. You were saying about your Aurora.
Oh, yes, yeah. So she had the Aurora Borealis. So and Aurora is the Roman goddess of the dawn, and Eos is the Greek. It is exactly the same person, but Aurora and Eos is the Greek.
Right.
And the story goes that she goes across the sky in her chariot and scatters stars and flowers, and kind of to begin the day. And I just thought there was a really nice kind of link there between kind of these artists that I'm all speaking with, and there
absolutely
always is a strand of some commonality with mythology, which is really cool.
Well, I think in real artists, there always is.
I agree.
It will always be there at some point.
Yeah.
Because there's this kind of deep symbolic meanings, I think, that we're all pulling from the same pool, really, you know?
Yeah.
The same archetypes. I think, I think artists that deny that completely and are either lying or they're not real artists.
I like it. Bold. Yeah, no, I agree. I think when the process has kind of gone through that refinement process to the point where it's so pure, it does always come back down to the stories of archetypes.
Yeah, it's like, because it's like genetics. We're all related to Charlemagne, for instance. If you live in Europe, you're related to Charlemagne genetically. And so therefore, if we're all on this planet, then we're all related to those stories.
Yeah,
really. And that's the thing when you start to look at the transnational symbolism in especially all the motifs in folklore. They're so similar all over the world. They're the same stories. There's slight variations, but effectively they're the same stories. And that's what I suppose I'm trying to work with at the moment, is produce something that has this great breadth of understanding and acceptance, I suppose, internationally.
Specifically with Celtic.
No, well, not really. Well, I'm looking into Irish. You see, we have a really good resource in the 1930s. The Irish government sent out some collectors to collect stories and music. And the stories, there's one particular project called the Schools Project where they went to all the schools and asked the kids, what stories do you know about your locality? They told the stories and they're all written down. A lot of them in Irish would have been at that time, and then transcribed into English. And the thing about the kids' stories is they're so pure because they would have been told them by their grandparents and they're probably even their great grandparents, which would have spread back into like quite old times, really, certainly into the 1800s. And so it's got this connection with the past, and they're brilliant stories. They're mad. I love Irish folk stories because they're just crazy. Just like they don't make sense. Memes. Yeah, no, but they're just like what's going on? Why? You know what I mean? But you something resonates in you when you read these stories. It seems really odd, but it seems to make sense somewhere deep within.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's what I'm trying to get to is why. Why are they making sense? So I'm trying to build a complete story, like a hero's journey, a monomyth. Like Joseph Campbell kind of hero's journey.
Yeah.
From from somewhere to somewhere that takes in a load of these different events. And yeah, I did it before. I did a film called Threads, which was based on that, but it didn't have any dialogue. It was just a visual journey through all these kind of folklore events. And it's funny because when I made it, but nobody was particularly interested in it. But now, about 3 years later, and particularly after lockdown, it started to get a lot of traction in terms of film festivals.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that means. Yeah.
Oh, really? That concept. So I love Joseph Campbell and A Face with A Hero of a Thousand Faces. So are you approaching it from, or did approach it from, kind of many stories of many folklore to see if there was a commonality of all of them to thread into one giant story, or did you concentrate on?
Well, I'm only just starting.
Oh, it's a huge project, I imagine.
Yeah, no, but so I've made a couple of little ones, and what I did with those is that I did one about crows. So I was going down the road the other day, and I go past these trees where these crows nest every year. So I was looking at the crows, as usual. That's for 15 times I've been looking at these crows nesting over the last 15 years I've been living here. And then I noticed some crows were in a different tree, and they were like chatting away, and there were other crows in the main trees, but in this kind of other tree there were a load of other crows. I said, I bet they're all the blokes. I bet all the women are back with the eggs, you know what I mean, sorting out the nesting and getting things, chatting away. And these are all the blokes like up here. And I said, well, what would they be saying? You know what I mean? What would they be talking about? And I said, they'd probably be telling these really old stories about things that happened to crows. So I just looked up crows in the archive, and I found all these crow stories, and then made a composite from them. So had this kind of crow story. And then, because I was also working on this ghost film at the time, and I had all these narrations about these Irish ghost stories recorded. So I just put that through a granulator and I made it sound like they were crows. So you actually have this kind of, but it's actually a real story underneath all that kind of effects. Yeah, you can't hear it.
Yeah.
It's this idea of compositing stories, the essence of the story, very, very little micro fragments, bring them together. And I suppose that I'll do that with each of these conditions along the way of the hero's journey. And then the whole thing will be a composite. So it was just drawn from lots of sources. But as the guy that I'm working with in the folklore library said, he said the good thing, if you're doing it academically, he says, you just have to be really careful, But if you're doing it as an artist, you can do anything you want.
It's great, isn't it? I know, I love that title. I love the identity of what kind of comes with that. It's like, I'm just an artist, It's like you're just. It's
my idea, my interpretation. Yeah.
I've always what's always found interesting as well is where kind of like kind of these old sayings come from. Like eat crow. And have you ever heard of that?
Is it? Say again.
Eat crow.
Eat crow.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that is I never heard that to say to eat crow. But yeah, going along with kind of where things come from, we have these sayings that we just say really without even giving much thought to, and where they come from essentially, and also it's particularly to do with the body as well, like gut feeling and etc. It's all the kind of the individual body, and then where these stories come from. I think they're kind of a similar map.
Well, yeah, these are all part of our kind of cultural inheritance, and I suppose you see the problem with technology, the problem with television, radio, internet, film, cinema, and stuff like that, is that there's less storytelling going on in a local sense. So when I first came to Ireland in the early 90s, Ireland was it felt like the 50s in England. It was absolutely brilliant. It was so I wouldn't say old fashioned, because it still had modern stuff going on, but it's had all these really old things where you could go into some pub in the middle of nowhere and just chat to people, and they would tell you these stories, and brilliant stuff, And of course, a lot of those people are dead now. They had the stories, and I know they are being collected, and there are professional storytellers, but just from a familial point of view, from in your own family, there's less storytelling going on. So kids are, and also they're not even paying attention. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I suppose in the past, although it's still boring to hear the stories of your grandparents, it was all you could hear. So you did take them in. And also I suppose the stories, because they were spooky stories, that kind of people have a bit more interest in them. Yeah?
But I guess we're in that transitional state where, especially in the arts, there's a lot of funding ongoing on digitalizing like museum and archives and stories. And even though there's less kind of storytelling in that traditional sense, when a story is told now, it's got the potential to reach millions of people within an instant, as opposed to having to take centuries of passing down and things getting slightly changed along the way. It's a different process now.
It is, yeah. Well, I think that's why it's important that artists are working with mythic motifs, because it's a really important job to kind of try and put that out there in a big way. And I suppose I see that as my kind of call to arms, really. I've always done that, really. So all of my work is really dedicated primarily to the landscape. That's where it comes from, and that's what it's always been about. So I always made landscape films, and to me they told the stories, because I could see the stories, and eventually I've kind of realized that maybe I need to give a bit more information here, so I have, but then at the same time, so I've always been a filmmaker in the sense that I've made television programs. So I'm a producer director for TV, so I've done a lot of stuff mainly in Ireland, and a lot of that would have kind of folklore things in it, but that's like straightforward narrative documentaries.
The importance that storytelling has on the well-being of an audience. Like, what do you want them to like, kind of, if you could ideally place the response with someone, what do you want them to feel, and what the effect of seeing your work is?
Well, I suppose they are motifs because they relate to everyday experiences, but in a kind of extrapolated, kind of weird way. The folk stories. So I think when people, it's kind of comforting. I think people they align it to their own experience, and they feel a bit more fulfilled about themselves as people. And I suppose it has a kind of a spiritual quality of it too. So because a lot of these stories, in a very oblique way, connect people to the landscape, to the land. They come from the land. They're about people and place, really. So that's always been. You see, before the stories, and underlying the stories for me, that my work, in particularly in landscape stuff, was always about. I had a particular way of viewing the landscape, which I wasn't sure that everybody had, and I just wanted to tell that story of what it actually, to me, what the landscape looks like, and how it's kind of the alien side of the land that I'm really interested in, how it's not human. And the reason it's not human is because we've separated ourselves from nature. And I suppose that's it, really. So there's a really ancient Hebrew story. I can't even. I was doing this PhD and I was researching this. Didn't finish the PhD, by the way, but I'm still a candidate. But there was this story where it said the angel on the gates of the Garden of Eden, as Adam left, gave Adam the secrets of alchemy in case he should ever want to return. And I thought it's a really ancient Hebrew text. That was like really interesting, because what that seemed to say was that what alchemy is, and alchemy is about spiritual ascension, not about changing lead into gold. That it was about, all the secrets of alchemy were about the connectivity of man to nature, And I think that the basic, so I kind of wrote it down. So I said, well, what could it be that could be that simple that you could tell to somebody as they were leaving? Oh, and by the way, so So I think it's just the fact that you live in nature and you will die with nature, and that's the secret, you know. And I think if you understand that and can get to grips with it, then we lose our kind of superiority over the earth. And as soon as you lose that, hello, that's ecology, isn't it? So you know what I mean. I suppose really at the end of the day, it's an ecological message, but in a kind of really deep way, you know. I suppose it has to be, you know.
Yeah, for sure. It's a reflection, as above, so within, as within, so without. What happens on the outside is reflection on what's going on the inside, and how nature works and the laws of nature, and how to apply that psychologically to your own like emotional, spiritual, mental self is the route map back to the Garden of Eden in that way.
Yeah, and I suppose if we were all a bit more connected with that, then I'm not saying that we wouldn't live in a modern society, you know, but I think if we understood it in a really deep level, then you wouldn't kill the earth in the same way you wouldn't kill your own children, you know? So it's the same.
And that's what the definition of syntropy. So it's the opposite of entropy. And entropy is chaos.
I suppose I should have looked that up, shouldn't I?
No, not a lot of people they don't know what syntropy means. But yeah, entropy being chaos, so kind of the destruction, and you know, it is part of the world that we live in. And then syntropy is order out of chaos, and how to bring order and kind of unthread these knots that we've made for ourselves, so we can see clearly.
Yeah, well, no, absolutely. So yeah, fair play to you. I mean, yeah, it's all part of the same gig.
Yeah, of course it is. But yeah,
and it's you know, it's great that people are doing it, really. And I suppose, you know, hooking up people up is really good too. And I suppose, yeah, for me, it's very important. It's very important that the art has craft, and that it has a history and a patina of skill over a long period of time. For this kind of stuff, I think that's really important for people to attract people and to engage them. You know what I mean? I mean, there is a lot of art now which is conceptual, you know, and I see myself as a post-conceptualist. I like to get that in there.
Okay.
I don't think there's such a movement, but I'm starting one right now.
Cool.
The post-conceptualists. So, you know, it's the idea that art should have a spiritual core,
yes,
and not just be conceptual, because it's not art. You know, I mean, a lot of art that I see that is technologically driven, because I did this PhD and it was an arts and digital humanities, digital arts and digital humanities award, and it was funny because we were all mixed up, the artists and the humanities people, and a lot of the projects that the humanities people were coming up with were a lot of the projects that you would consider to be kind of conceptual art projects, you know. So we're going to put, I don't know, QR codes on everything, and when people walk around with their phones around, it'll give them data about the carbon levels in this. Yeah, that's not art. I mean, that's a science and humanities project.
Visualizing data.
Yeah, and data visualization is like a huge thing now, and unfortunately, I don't think people particularly like it. I mean, the thing about what you're doing is good because it's attractive, it's enjoyable, it's entertaining, and it has a message and a meaning. So. For me, that's everything all in one place, and that's what it should be, really. From my point of view, everybody else obviously does what they want to do.
Yeah. So I've always considered myself a conceptual artist. No, I find this very interesting. So I agree that there is a lot of how's the best word, to kind of fantastical art out there that is purely tech driven, and it's all about what can we do with this tech and how, and the kind of the boundaries of that, which, if that is the concept, it has validity. But if it is just because you can, and it's quite a lazy way of creating, because you're putting so much power into the tech to engage with the audience, and of course intention is everything. And so there is a fine line for sure.
Well, it's when the statement next to the artwork is bigger than the artwork, then you're in trouble. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's also, you see, most conceptual art are simply one-line jokes, because you see people in, you know, exhibitions, and there's an action man sitting on a breeze block, and they're going, "What the fuck's that?" You know, they're gonna look at it. What's that? I don't know. And then they read the statement, blah 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 blah, and they go, "Oh, yeah." Right, next. And you know, to me, that's to me what conceptual art basically is. But it has, I mean, but when you walk in and you see Millet's Ophelia, you know, in the Tate, you don't go, "What's that? Hang on a minute. Oh yeah, right. Oh, I'm not sure about that." You walk in and you go, "Jesus Christ!"
Yeah. It's how are you engaging with the intellect or with the heart, with the artwork? And again, I was like, the true conceptual artwork kind of, it deals with both, because both are a part. So in order to understand the feeling that you're feeling, the artwork also gives its answer at the same time as giving the feeling.
Yeah, but then you shouldn't have to.
The question and the answer are the same thing.
Yeah, but that's all art is conceptual in that sense. I mean, you could then just, but then you go and buy a book on it, you know, if you really, really want to know about why Millet did that and what all the symbolism is in it. Yeah.
Or you have a group discussion on the different perspectives, and then come to kind of this,
I'm totally into that.
Yeah.
I'm not into people taking artwork apart and finding out what it means behind it, but I think it should be engaged on a visceral level first of all. You know, that's where I kind of, because I'm a composer primarily, so I make music and I make art and I make films. But if I'm making a piece of artwork, I always make the music first of all, and the reason I do that is to nail down the vibe, because then I know what I'm doing. Because if I sit down and I can imagine the artwork, I can visualize it completely without ever having gone out my studio, and I can make the templates, the atmosphere with musically, and then I have that. So, you know, it's like that for me. Then the music, because the music's an emotional format. We all respond to music emotionally. We don't respond to it intellectually. Some musicians might, you know, oh, that's a Moog Prophet, I think. Well, that's a Prophet's 5 synthesizer with a whatever on it. But most people, when they're listening to music, they're just emotionally responding to it. Whereas film, we respond intellectually to images and to film, because we've become primarily visual animals. So we're trying to kind of figure out what it actually means. But if you've got music with it, which is completely synchronized, like in your Syntropy maybe, to the images, then part of the intellectual concept with the images is then channeled through the emotional response of the human being, and therefore you're getting this kind of double whammy, which for me is kind of what it's always been about. So I remember watching films as a kid, and there'd be a certain part in a film, and the hairs would stand up on the back of my neck, and I didn't know why. And what I wanted to do, then why I got into this gig business in the first place, was to make films that were that for the whole length, you know, whatever that was. And when I just discovered what it was this kind of synchronicity of sound and vision to create mood and symbol all at the same time. They don't seem to make sense. They do make sense in one sense, but then also they have this musicality, you know, about them too, which is kind of interesting. And that might be something to do with the musicality, because I was talking to this guy in the folklore place, and they said they're very, although nobody's ever said you can't change this story, the stories pretty much don't change over hundreds of years. They stay the same, and it's almost like they have this self-protecting aspect to them. So it's the same with traditional music. So, because I worked a lot with traditional music, Celtic music, and it's the same, but it's different. But it retains something of an essence, which is the core sense of the song, of the tune. So when we did the Celtic songlines, I'll send you a link, which is this 4-part program. We went from the Isle of Skye down to Galicia in Spain, all along the Atlantic seaboard, making an album. So I selected 5 tunes that had commonality across the regions, the kind of the 7 Celtic nations, by either story, tune or something else. I can't remember history, about them. And we then took these 5 or 6 or 7 tunes, all along place, and we took them to different people. So we went to the Isle of Man and said, it's all in Irish, by the way, the program. So the gas thing about that is that when our presenter spoke in Irish to somebody in the Isle of Man, they could understand each other. It's very, really, really similar in Manx and Irish. And they just started playing, oh yeah, that tune. And they started playing it and they knew the tune. And it was just beautiful to see this common language. But again, it's that integrity of the tunes over thousands of years. Nobody knows how long. I mean, because isn't it recently I saw something ages ago that all these stories, like the fairies, the typical kind of fairy stories, like the Three Bears or Hansel and Gretel and all that stuff that we are kind of really old. We know they're older than the collectors that collected them, but now they reckon they're really, really old. I mean, they could be like Bronze Age or something, So they reach right back into our prehistoric times. So they've got to be important for us to learn something from.
Yeah. The simulacra. Nothing is original. It's a copy of a copy of a copy. And like you said, it's down to the artist to retain and express that kind of the golden truth. That's why that has lasted. Yeah.
That's interesting you say that, because this film I did called Threads, which I really like. It's this journey through the landscape. The original idea was that somebody leaves a pub and they step on a stray sod. So that's like an Irish expression, which means you just end up in a different place. Suddenly you're lost. And I've spoken to quite a few people and they've had this experience. Okay, usually after the pub. But no, sometimes not. But I spoke to some guy the other day and he said, he went into this forest. It was a yew forest. And I've had weird experiences in yew forests too. And he went in and suddenly everything felt different. His footsteps sounded louder all of a sudden, like he'd walked into a cave, And he turned around and he had to go and pick up his daughter, and he turned around and he couldn't see his way out. And all the trees looked identical, but they looked absolutely like replicas of each other. And he couldn't see any way out. So he just sat down and he was really quiet. He said, well, I don't know what's going on here, but I really have to go and see my daughter. And that's more important than this. And then he looked back up and he could see his way out. Wow. I love those kind of stories. And a lot of them are kind of like that. But anyway, in this story, the guy goes and wanders off down on this, following this river. And originally what we were going to do was we were going to have this little golden ball, and we were going to have it rolling along and tracking along and following it through this kind of dusty paths and stuff. But it was too difficult for us to film because we just couldn't get the speed right and track at the same time as this ball. We thought of doing it with CGI, but it just looked stupid. So eventually I said, well, let's just do it with a thread. So I went to buy some thread and I said, well, have you got any thread? I thought, well, we need red really, because that would show up, against the greenery. And she just had this big ball of wool, red wool about this big. So I said, oh, that'll do. So we made this thread, and then we were able to track along it. But then, of course, I found out that the red thread is like a huge motif, but it's completely accidental. So the red thread is Ariadne's thread, which she put in the Minotaur's labyrinth for your man to find his way out. And in Japan, the lovers tie a red thread from their little fingers to each other in a symbol of faith and connectivity. And it kind of just had all these kind of meanings. So it was great that you said the golden thread, but it's like the red thread.
Yeah, I've never heard of the red thread. That's
it's a really nice motif.
Yeah.
But the Ariadne's thread is also something in computer language. It's some really interesting thing to do with computers.
I love it when the AI has matched up with ancient lore. It blows my mind. It's so exciting.
Yeah, but all the stuff, the stuff's there.
It is. It's just
so it's like it's Jungian, yeah. You're pulling.
Yeah. It is.
You're pulling the stuff out of the collective unconscious. It's all there, you just got to be in the right mood. So was it Bruce Chatwin, not Bruce Chatwin, another Chatwin fella who did this book on symbolism? He said it's like a pool. It's like a really deep pool, and you've got to be really quiet so the pool stills itself, and you're like a cat on the edge of the pool waiting for these fish, and you just grab one out.
Yeah.
And that's what we are as artists, collecting symbols from the depths, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.